You are now watching Zach Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' peeps? Welcome back to the channel, Zach Lesage here. Today we're going to be covering over the top 10 best decks in formats. I cover these every single Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern, and there's been some decent movement this week. We have decks that are soaring high and decks that are dropping low. We have some new entrants into the top 10, and we have some decks that have shifted down to the top 20. If you want to learn more about the top 20 decks, we have that video coming out tomorrow every single Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Watch these videos, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel to stay in the know in the Pokemon TCG. That being said, all of the decks are in the pinned comment along with reference videos for most of them, so by all means check that out if you want to up your Pokemon TCG game. That being said, we are going to be jumping into our number 10 spot. Let's get it. Swooping in to number 10 and shooting up from number 13 is the GALARIAN SIRFETCH'D V deck. I do want to say that I predicted that this deck would shoot up a little bit. It's interesting enough, and I think it's one of those decks that actually has a decent position against the metagame. Yeah, this deck's a little bit difficult to play, but at the same time, it's really cool. You're able to go ahead and Strong Legs charge, rip some energies down with Zapdos, swoop in with SIRFETCH'D V. That's going to be strong against Jolteon decks and Gengar decks and ETERN decks. I mean, there's 3 decks that are weak to the top, or in the top decks that are weak to fighting, so that's huge. Also, as a single prize card deck, you have access to Moltres and Hoopa, and you could start getting some VMAX Pokemon down. Mew and Shadow Rider and Dragapult are all weak to Dark, so the Galarian Moltres does seem to be doing pretty well there too. So I really like how this deck comes together. This deck's chilling at 130 CP. A lot of people ask me, yo Zach, what does the CP mean when it comes to your ranking? So I rank events between 4 players all the way to 512 plus range. Those have different rankings for first, second, top 4, top 8, top 16, top 32. So for all play limitless and major in real life event data, I compile that and I give some kind of CP ranking for each placement. That's where this one gained 130 CP throughout all the tournaments that it's played in the past week or so. That's really the best way to put it. So a lot of people have been asking. That being said, I do want to let you know that I think this deck seems like it's going to stay within the top 10 for the foreseeable future. A lot of decks have seemed to nullify. This week in Limitless, we saw kind of a drop in attendance. I'm not sure what that is. It just seems like events are less attended overall and less events overall or something like that. It could just be me. It could just be format boredom. It could be a lot of things, but I do want to let you know that like last week I think it was 170 CP, so if you do see a difference on that, it's based on any given week. Some events are going to be bigger, some events are going to be smaller, etc, etc. This is a great time, by the way, to let me know what you think your top 5 decks are going to be in the comments below. Also, I do want to let you know you can help support the content by using code ZLesage5, that's in the description, at PTCGO or if you're looking to up your game, you can go in the description. There's a Metafy link. I'm now coaching on Metafy, so if you want to learn how to play any of these decks, preparing for in real life, trying to grow for PTCG Live, hit me up on Metafy or hit me up in the DMs so we could discuss that. And yeah, I mean, kind of jumping back into it, this deck seems cool. I think it's just cool. I don't think it's anything much more than cool, but it's definitely like top 10 cool, lower top 10 cool. Creeping in through the shadows all the way to number 9 is ETERNATUS VMAX. I mean, ETERNATUS largely seeing a lot more success nowadays. It's making top 10 consistently, and I think it's just because you have access to being a big dark deck, being able to knock out Mew VMAX, and you have Galarian Weezing that can shut off Inteleons and Drizzles and just random things. So I think this is a proper build for the deck. Goal is just build up a bunch of dark Pokemon in play with Dread End, or with Eternal Zone and hit with Dread End. Then you have Galarian Weezing that you could block proper decks if you need to. Maybe build up some damage, turn yourself into a single prize card deck. I do think that this is the best way to play it. I actually cut the Umbreon out. I realized I didn't like the Umbreon. I think this deck's probably going to stay within the top 10. It's just a good dark deck. Now, one thing that I want to say is, as more dark decks that are weak to fighting see success, we might see a resurgence of Rapid Strike Urshifu Melanie. I mean, that deck does pretty well against some of the decks within our top 10. Now, there are quite a few decks that still beat it. Things like Mew and things like, I mean, we don't need to go through the entire list. Rapid Strike Urshifu either wins or loses against most decks in the top 10. It's not like it has a fair chance against a lot of them, so I do want to let you know that as dark decks solidify themselves and fighting weak decks solidify themselves in the metagame, I do think that there's an opening for Rapid Strike Urshifu to kind of jump back in. Watch that out if you are an E-turn player. I think I'd rather play a different deck if I were playing E-turn. I think decks like Gengar are much better, or decks like Single Strike are much better. But if you do like E-turn, I mean, by all means, it's not a bad deck. Splashing all the way to number 8 is SUICUNE LUDICOLO. This deck jumped all the way up from number 14, and I do want to say that this week's been a little bit weird when it comes to decks. Get into that in a second. Let's explain this strategy to anyone who wants to know. SUICUNE LUDICOLO is all about using Blizzard Rondo, increasing that damage with Enthusiastic Dance, and being able to search out whatever you want with Shady Dealings. This list plays Cross Switcher, so you have that kind of gigantic Cross Switcher Melanie turn planned at the end, and Cape of Toughness gives you some extra HP. Now, here's where things get a little bit weird. SUICUNE decks have been absolutely everywhere. They kind of spiked up into the list. We had SUICUNE Inteleon with Path to the Peak. We had SUICUNE Ludicolo re-enter back into the metagame. We had SUICUNE Counterbox, and we've seen other SUICUNE variants just exist, like SUICUNE Ice Rider and all that kind of stuff in the past few weeks. Now, it seems like the decks have kind of formed together in a lot of ways. So SUICUNE Ludicolo, the highest placed SUICUNE deck, I'll give you that little tidbits, has basically taken the SUICUNE Path to the Peak deck and just SUICUNE Ludicolo. It's just like became SUICUNE Ludicolo. And anything else is really turned into SUICUNE Counterbox. You can kind of check that out when we jump into the top 20 decks every single Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, so check that out. But reasonably, it went from being 4 or 5 decks into 2 decks, and I think that's one thing that you will find is decks will evolve and adapt, and then other decks that are not seeing as much success will obviously just fail to exist. It got to the point where there was only 21 decks observed this week out of all my ranking systems. So you got to think when I'm doing a top 20 decks, there was one deck that didn't make it. If you want to take a guess at what deck didn't make it, let me know, and I will let you know the preview before even the video drops or anything else like that, or even if you put it, I'll definitely answer. But SUICUNE Ludicolo, I think this deck is fine. I don't know if it's going to make top 10 next week. I think it's just happened to make top 10 this week. I think there's a lot of decks in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range that can definitely drop into the top 20 decks in any capacity at this point of the metagame. Single striking all the way to number 7 and previously number 6 on this list. So falling a spot is Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. 230 CP, I mean, it's fair. This deck used to be a definitive like top 3 deck, and it's kind of fallen down a lot more as the metagame has kind of grown to find ways to beat it. I think if I had a new word of advice, at the beginning of a format, players seem to stick to decks that have seen success in the last format. So looking at Brilliant Stars, it wouldn't surprise me if we saw Mew and Jolteon being decks that people play right from the beginning, because we know how they're built, we know that you're only adding a card or two from Brilliant Stars, etc. I think this is the case, or the opposite case here, where Single Strike was largely a successful deck in the Evolving Skies format, and it got successful towards the end. Players are like, let's baton pass that into our Fusion Strike format. And for the longest while, it seemed to work as a dark deck that was able to beat Mew, and a fighting deck that was able to beat Jolteon. And I mean, that's how this deck works. You're using a Single Strike kind of carrier of Houndoom. You attach the energies to your Pokemon. You can attack with Umbreon, or Urshifu, or be dark, or be fighting. And then you have the Single Strike support of Urn of Vitality and Tower of Darkness. That being said, this deck was really an early pick because people knew how it's built. This deck largely remains unchanged in a month, really not even gaining anything from Fusion Strike. I'm looking here to see if there's even a Fusion Strike card that would be played in this deck. I don't really see it. And you can let me know if I'm missing one. I might just be being absolutely oblivious here. But it is one of those things where Single Strike is now falling because decks have adapted around it. Decks have grown in strength. This deck continuously gets pushed out of the top 5. It was like, there was a one point where I was like, this deck's definitively a top 5 deck. Now we're in number 7, and I don't know if this deck's even a top 10 deck, in my opinion. I mean, I think in terms of popularity and playability, that this deck is going to stay within the top 10. But in my personal opinion, this deck does not matter at all. If you're a Single Strike fan, I'm not trying to upset you or anything. I just do not think that this deck is relevant at this moment. So if you are choosing this deck, that's my opinion. By all means, feel free to prove me wrong. I do think Single Strike has what it takes to do well in tournaments, but I just don't think it has what it takes to be the best deck in the format. And if you're not having those moments like Mew or Jolteon, where I think it's actually really close between those, closer than most people think, I don't know why you would pick that deck, right? So if you're like, I picked this deck up because I picked up the League Battle deck, that's cool. But in terms of competitive play, we can't necessarily look at cost or barrier to entry. We have to look at things where it's just like Single Strike is just not seeing success as much as other decks right now. That's because it's not as good as other decks right now. Proven by tournament results, maybe it's a good idea to pick up another deck. That's my thoughts on it. We'll see exactly how it goes. Skyscrapering over the rest of the competition to number 6, falling from number 3 is Duraludon VMAX. This Pokemon's all about its skyscraper ability, slowing down or stopping your opponent that has any special energies attached from doing damage to your Duraludon VMAX. You have Crushing Hammers to take away their basic energies so they have a hard time to attack, and a lot of healing cards with Pokemon Center Lady, Team Yell Towel, Crystal Cave, etc. This deck's kind of a mid-range control deck, or an attacking control deck, and I think it's a pretty decent deck overall. This deck seems to be falling down a lot lately, and I could, like, it notably felt there was a lack of presence this week from this deck. I don't know if players find the deck boring to play. This deck has definitely spiked a lot of tournaments, and I mean, you will win against the right matchups. However, I do think there are decks that are trying to beat this deck or found ways to beat this deck. Most notably, Gengar Path to the Peak, a deck that I was able to invent with my teammate, Von TCG. We basically put 4 paths into the deck, and that beats Duraludon now. Jolteon has 4 paths. That does well. ZACIAN continuously sees play by Joshua Sutherland and Ippo. There's really, like, those are the 2 things that I'd say is where, like, Mew's adding in a 3rd Psychic Energy. I won a tournament with Mew this past week. Decks are trying to counter Duraludon because they don't like losing to decks that they always lose to. So, as a deck like this continuously sees success, there has to be a point where it falls off. So, unlike Single Strike, I think that this deck will fall off and will spike up again, whereas Single Strike is largely becoming irrelevant in the format. So, think of this like Decidueye, where as soon as you're hot or at your hottest, that's when the next week you're at your weakest. And I mean, it might take another week or 2 for Duraludon to really spike back up, but I do think it's going to be above number 6 in the next couple weeks, at least in the Fusion Strike format, so stay tuned for that. Just a quick reminder that if you are trying to pick up any of these cards, you can go to PTCGO plug in code ZLesage5 to save 5% on your next order. Or there's also the pinned comments below in the pinned comment below. You could also check out all of the lists, videos, all that stuff. I'm updating them as well too. I have a whiteboard that I'm just like, Duraludon's on there somewhere. I'm going to do an updated video because I haven't covered it in about a few weeks or a month or something like that. Swooping into number 5 is Sableye V with Galarian Weezing and Galarian Moltres. I mean, this deck has kind of popped up over a while, over the past couple weeks, I should say, spiked up, really went from nothing all the way up to number 5. So this deck falling a spot really doesn't change too much. Decks can enter into the top 5, and I mean, it was pretty close between all these decks, and I mean, even this deck and Duraludon were relatively close between 310 and 380 CP. The strategy of this deck is to have single prize card Pokemon that you really send up to do some kind of damage or slow down your opponents while you are building up a Fiery Wrath or a Crazy Claws in the background. So you can use Weezing, chill that out there, see if your opponent's going to get anything, severe poison, build up damage, swoop in, Crazy Claws, knockouts. Once your opponent draws enough prize cards, you can go in there with Fiery Wrath. This deck is very difficult to play. I know a lot of people ask me about the cast form. The cast form is Tapu Koko. It has free retreats. I think that one's better because it's searchable by Level Ball. And then a lot of people are going to be like, what about the other cast forms? Well, I think that there's nothing that's doing that little bit of damage or for 1 energy for a metal type energy attacker. That's for a different story. Regardless, I think Galarian Weezing's in a similar case of Duraludon, where this deck was largely a surprise deck to most of the community. We didn't really necessarily see it coming. Now that we have access and understand this deck, use adding an Oricorio. Oricorio allows either your Oricorio or Meloetta to take a hit from a Assault Gates, and turning that 90 damage into 70 damage, which is huge. It doesn't sound like a lot, but there's really 1 swing turn in the game. That's the swing turn in the game. I do think that this is something that's dropped the deck down. I think decks like Jolteon seeing a lot of play have really hurt this deck. I mean, I think this deck is probably going to stay within the top 5. Certainly a great deck, but it could slip out a little bit more. I don't really see it slipping out of the top 10 though, so keep that in mind as you choose this deck. It also gets better during Brilliant Stars, so keep that in mind too. Intrepid Sword all the way to number 4, and jumping up from 5 last week is Turbo ZACIAN. ZACIAN using Intrepid Sword, ripping some energies, drawing some cards, hitting hard with Brave Blade, Zamazenta block, and VMAXs. This deck really seems to be the consistent, stable deck that's kind of resurging back into the top 5. I know that I know my homies Josh and my homie Ipo are both gonna be really happy, smiles ear to ear, because Turbo ZACIAN moved up a spot, and it's largely due to them playing it. I mean, Josh had that placement, I believe it was a top 4 at the late night series, and we had Ipo winning the Synthwave tournament with Single Strike, or with not Single Strike, that's the other deck that they play, with ZACIAN. Regardless, it's one of those things where they're largely pushing the numbers for this deck over and over, and it's really the tag team duo of those two players. So I don't necessarily like this deck myself, but I can't necessarily knock it because they are seeing continuous success. This deck is relatively budget. I think it's a budget version of Mew. That's my honest opinion. I think that Mew does everything in this deck a little bit better. But it doesn't change the fact that this deck is seeing success. So if you are looking for a deck that's similar to Mew in some ways, I would definitely recommend this deck. It's definitely seen a lot of success. I mean, even if you look at like Lucario, Melmetal, Zacian, Zamazenta, that deck was really good too. This deck is very similar to it. I like the Crushing Hammers in my build. Not every single person's going to like it. I think you need that to beat Mew, and it might give you an edge against other decks. So by all means, try it out. Josh, Ipo, I don't know, you guys have mixed opinions on Crushing Hammers, but let me know what you feel in the comments below, guys. Really would appreciate it. But yeah, Zacian's cool. I'm just not a huge fan of it. GMAX swallowing up at number 3. All the way to number 3 from number 7. The week before was number 15. This is my pet deck, Gengar VMAX with Path to the Peak. This deck is absolutely taken off, and I don't want to be like, I've been saying Gengar has been good for a while, but I'm glad that it's finally getting the respect that it deserves, because it was driving me a little bit crazy. I'm like, Gengar is way too good for players not to be respecting it, and the fact that it holds its own against most of the decks in the top 10, if not all of them, more than almost any single deck in the top 10, this deck would see a lot more success if more players played it. Yeah, it's all about using Single Strike, Roar, building up Gengar, attacking with Fear and Panic, or GMAX Swallow Up, but this deck requires less energies than Single Strike, has the same kind of dark and fighting with the Single Strike URSHIFU V tech. You have Path to the Peak to get through Zamazenta V and access to Duraludon matchup and stuff like that. Gengar VMAX has more damage output for less energies than Single Strike, which regardless if you are playing against a Single Strike, because a lot of people bring that up when I say that Gengar is good, they're like, well, Single Strike's gonna beat Gengar. Well, if you attack with 2 prize card Pokemon, you're doing more damage per energy, so there is no way that you would win that matchup as Single Strike on average. Your opponent would have to be playing poorly you'd have to be playing poor with like Gengar in order to lose against Single Strike on average. That's not to say that it's not a close matchup, but it is favorable for Gengar because the weakness largely doesn't matter. If their 2 prize card Pokemon was going to knock out a 2 prize card Pokemon first. You can win that matchup just by putting a Houndour in the active spot and letting them take a single prize card while you take a 2 prize card format. It's all about simple numbers. 1, 2, 2, 2 is going to be slower than 2, 2, 2. And you have the option to evolve into a Gengar VMAX to do more damage for less energies than your opponent does. That's really where you get the excitement. Anyways, it's one of those things where I could talk about Gengar and its matchups all day long. This deck's moving on up. Will it move on up to Jolteon? Probably not. Not to spoil anything. When you get into the Jolteon and Mew territory, that's really where it's going to be really hard locked in this format. But I do want to say that Gengar does have decent matchups against both of those, if not favorable matchups against both of those. So maybe this is really the exposure that the deck needs. By all means, give this deck a try. I recently just covered this on the channel, so check out that Gengar video. That link is going to be in the pinned comment as well with this deck list that you can copy and paste right into PTCGO. zapping its way all the way to number 2, and sitting at number 2 for literally the past month and a half, 2 months, is Jolteon VMAX. This deck's all about using Max Thunder Rumble, 100 damage to the active, 100 damage to the bench. You can get that bench damage with ZACIAN, Inteleon's quick shooting ping, and I mean, I think this is really the list that I like for the deck. A lot of people are like, oh, you should play another Fan of Waves instead of Escape Rope. Escape Rope has saved my butt more times than Fan of Waves has, and I've really been liking how this deck plays out a lot. I see a lot of lists not playing 3 Path to the Peak. That's your way to beat Mew. Like, if you don't play 4 paths, it's favorable for Mew. I don't know what to tell all y'all Jolteon players. Y'all need to play it. I don't like the capture energies in this deck. If you are going to play capture energies, please play 2 or more. I think 1 just doesn't ever make sense. And you could often, like, honestly, the less capture energies you play in your deck, the more success that you see at whatever. So the lack thereof, the capture energies usually see success at my late night series, and I'd love to kind of showcase that. Anyways, it's one of those things. Jolteon VMAX, largely one of, if not the most consistent decks in format, largely one of, if not the most successful decks in format. There's no reason not to play this. The only issue that I have coming up with it is mana fees coming out in Brilliant Stars. So if you're investing in the cards now, Jolteon might be a little bit difficult because there's a bench barrier Pokemon to get him around Max Thunder Rumble. However, the believer in me tells me that Jolteon will find a way around it, because as I've explored the Brilliant Stars format, decks don't really need mana fee. The only decks that are playing it are single prize card decks, so by all means check that out. I think that Jolteon's largely just a great deck. There's no reason not to play it. So if you're debating between this and anything else in tournament, Jolteon VMAX is a great choice. Here we are, we made it to number 1, previously number 1, Mew VMAX. Now, if you're looking at the CP total, this was the closest it's ever been for number 1 in the past, like, 2 months. Mew VMAX is only 190 CP away from Jolteon. Did Jolteon have a good week, or is Jolteon slowly surpassing Mew? And I mean, it might take a while to get around. I mean, Jolteon definitely was the number 2 deck for a while, but I do think there is a world where Jolteon could surpass Mew. Now, I do want to say I don't know why. I think players might just be playing Jolteon because they don't want to play Mew, or they're worried about how to play Mew against all these Dark-type matchups. I actually played this exact Mew list. This is the same Mew list as last week. I won the Shuffle Squad Mysterious Master Ball Tournament, almost 100 participants with this deck. Cross Fusion Strike is amazing because you can copy Techno Blast or Melodious Echo, and even Psychic Leap or even Glistening Droplets. There's so many options. Having options for attacks is huge. Having Fusion Strike System as a draw ability is huge. Accelerating energies with Elisas is huge. If you know how to play Oricorio right, by all means check out Oricorio. Like, Oricorio helps you against your Sableye V matchup with that interaction that I talked about earlier against their Hoopa attacking your Meloetta or your Oricorio. It helps out against Jolteon. It can help out in Mew matchups. I think Oricorio is a necessary inclusion right now. If you aren't playing Oricorio, go ahead and slap that into your deck. We actually have my run on the Shuffle Squad, or largely a large portion of my run. I think at least like from the top 8 or top 4 and up. So check it out for the Mysterious Master Ball stream there. We had my teammate Lindsay stream the event for the entire community. So if you want to see this deck in action, how I played that tournament, check this one out, because I was able to win a tournament exactly with this list. Now, that's not to say that there's not a better list out there, or that there's not changes that you could make personally. I do think that Mew is a deck that you could have your own flavor. I think this is default the best, most consistent list. Just like it has answers to every single deck in the formats. It has the right kind of counts for everything. It's not over-teched, it's not under-teched. I just think it's like the one that's just right. And that's not because I made it. I think there's a lot of other players that have kind of came to the same reasonable idea of Mew VMAX. This just seems to be the best way to play it. So by all means, if you've been struggling with Mew, check this one out. If not, I mean, Mew VMAX is a great deck. Only gets better with Brilliant Stars. And let me know if you think Mew VMAX is going to be number 1 again in the comments below. Did you guess Mew VMAX is number 1? Let me know in the comments below. I do get back to every single person's comments. Might take me a day or two, but I will get there. So I'd love to hang out and chat with you. Let's get it. And that's what we got going on for this video today. Hopefully all of y'all enjoyed seeing the decks. Is there a deck that you thought was going to make it that didn't make it? Let me know in the comments below. I love when people throw their guesses out there for the top 10, the top 5, the top 3, the top 1. Let me know exactly what's going on, and I do get back to every single person's comments, so if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, let me know in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up. It does really help boost the YouTube algorithm as a smaller YouTuber. It really helps out a lot, and it's the freest way to support the channel. You could also toss a subscription. We're trying to get to 10K. It'd be huge if we could. Let's make it happen. Tell your friends about this channel. Seriously, if you could just tell one friend about this channel who plays Pokemon, and they could be like, yeah, I watch his channel, I subscribe to his channel, maybe they could tell a friend too, you know what I'm saying? It's free content, really here to help you out, and especially as in real life events and more major events and PTCG Live come out, I'm going to really boost my content even more, making the game more accessible to everyone. So that would be a huge help. And if you also want to help out, I do have coaching that I offer on Metafy. Check that out. I have that in the description. I just signed on. So hit me up if you are looking to improve your gameplay. I'll catch up with everybody later. Have yourself a great one. Peace out and have a great day. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video, and have yourself a great day. Thanks.